So we are so excited to be here today to share really interesting and meaningful news for the country about what is happening with trail networks across the country. But we are going to get started with a little video that kind of talks about why this is important. So let's see how that works out.
To transform a community, you have to have things that everyone can enjoy, and a trail is just that.
We want the trails to be active and not passive, provide an opportunity to de-stress so that people can connect to nature, they can improve their health, they can have some recreation that's not high cost, but that's high value.
The outdoors is who we are. We're always on the water, we're always on the rivers, we're always on the waterfront. The trail complements that way of life.
A lot of these towns, they get a real boost when these trails come in.
That means they're going to stay at those towns. That means they're going to eat at those towns. They might need to get their bike fixed at those towns. They might want to go shopping at those towns.
We are engaged with equitable development because there's lots of people who live here, who live close to the proposed trail, engage people across the many neighborhoods that this trail would cross. And we want to make sure that they benefit first, and also that this amenity doesn't displace the people in the community.
We want to work with Rails to Trails to make sure that the trails in our neighborhoods are connected to people in a real way.
So I'm Brandy Horton. I am the Vice President of Communications at Rails to Trails Conservancy, and I am really honored to be able to host this panel with this group today. And I wanted to start with this video because it really gives us context for why what we're sharing matters so much. The economic impact, the quality of life impact, the equity impacts around access to transportation, outdoor recreation, and really well-being in so many ways. That is the backdrop for what we're going to share today. And I am joined by Ryan Chow, the president of Rails to Trails Conservancy. Thanks for being here with me. With Mel Mendez, who is the New York and Northeast Regional Coordinator for Latino Outdoors. And with William Murdock, who is the Executive Director of an organization called the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. And for those who don't know what that is a metropolitan planning organization, and it's a super important entity because it really helps to guide the priorities around how transportation decisions are made and how transportation funding is spent. So another piece of context for the conversation, because there's a lot of potential and a lot of really important decisions that are going to have to come here in a few minutes. When I was preparing for this afternoon and I was thinking about being in Columbus and why that matters as we're talking about America's trail networks, this is really a bigger conversation than just Columbus. I was reading the article that came out in the winter 2021 issue of Rails to Trails magazine, and there's a quote that I felt captured kind of the joyful spirit of all of this, I think, really impactful and kind of wonky stuff we might talk about today. And it's a quote by a woman named Jasmine Higgins. So she's a person who lives in Columbus. She's a user of the trail system. She's somebody who found this infrastructure during the pandemic. And what she said was that trails tend to appear as soon as you start looking for them. And in this moment, and there's a map that we're going to share online in a minute, but there's also some maps around the room here in Columbus. And when you start to look for the trails, they're there. There's more than 40,000 miles of multi-use trails across the country. And then when we started to look for the trail networks, guess what? They're there. And there are a lot of people who often tell us, they're not there. And we're here today to say they are there and we are ready to do something really magnificent with them. So Ryan, you have my first question. And we're going to start with the country, as a whole. It's in a really unique moment. There is unprecedented enthusiasm and demand for trails. And the federal funding, and also the state and local, the public funding across the board to really create, connect, and maintain this infrastructure is kind of at levels we've never seen before, the movement as a whole over the course of 40 years. And when we look at the challenges that face communities, we look at the issues of economic sustainability, we look at the issues of the climate, we look at the issues of people's mental well-being and their physical health. Trails and trail systems provide a really different solution, and again, one that's sometimes maybe not recognized as much as it could be. It's also, I think, in this moment, fair to say that people question whether this is something that's just nice to have and it was kind of a good thing to be investing in at a time when the country was facing some hard stuff, or if it's need to have infrastructure. And that was our motivation, right, for why we wanted to better understand what was happening across the country. So I'm going to start with the big reveal. What did the research tell us?
Yeah, the research told us that we are in a truly exciting moment, and one that we can leverage to even more completely connect the nation by trail. You see here the map that was part of that research. And so for us, every trail is a treasure anywhere, but when we connect them together into systems, into networks, we can create a safe alternative for people to use them as transportation every single day for their everyday lives. And so that's really, I think, the stunning part of this analysis, is we look to see how many trail networks are out there and where are they located. And we found that there were 150 trail networks in the country. And I think what's really interesting is that represents half of Americans being in a county where a trail network is located or is being developed. They're in every state. They're in Washington, D.C. They're in Puerto Rico. And across the country, we found that about 74% were in urban, suburban communities, about 26 in rural communities. Kind of surprised, more in rural communities than we would have expected. But I think what is so exciting about that is that we realize if we make the right investments, if we truly connect the nation by trail, we can maximize the health, the economic, the equity, the transportation benefits in ways that are just stunning and profound for this country. And I think why networks matter is that we did some research that when trails connect, when you're part of a network, the use of those trails goes up by 80%, and thus the benefits just compound exponentially.
It's really exciting just looking at the pins on the map. You know, I have to do a lot of different communicating about our issue and trying to help people understand why it matters. And I used to have a talking point that there was at least one rail trail in every single state. So people would understand, okay, wow, this really is kind of ubiquitous. And now we can say there's at least one trail network in every single state. And if I wasn't hardwired to my seat, I'd jump up and clap, because it's a pretty exciting moment. And I think thinking about the opportunity, thinking about those benefits that we shared at the beginning, thinking about the opportunities that each of these little pins represents for the country, but also thinking about what it takes to kind of tap into that potential, the political will that it takes, the public will that it takes, really kind of getting people like William to make decisions that channel investment and resources into this infrastructure. What's that looking like?
What's that looking like? Well, I think you mentioned it. There are 40,000 miles of multi-use trails across the country. 40,000 miles. That's almost the same as the state highway transportation system. There are 25,000 miles of rail trails across the country. And so, as we've said before, the opportunity is to connect them into seamless infrastructure. Truly a new way of moving around this country actively. So we're seeing these trail networks just proliferate across the country. That's one indicator of momentum. Another, of course, is just public investment and funding. And so we mentioned briefly the bipartisan infrastructure investment law. That doubled federal funding for trails, and we're seeing places like Ohio here investing in trail networks like never before. So just this huge change in investment, value, public will. But then as part of our research, we surveyed people to get a sense of how are people really experiencing this moment. And we found that about a third say that trail networks can make their travel easier, that they would swap a car trip for a bike and walk trip if they had connected trails to do so. 82% of people in our research said that they support investment in connecting trails together. And about a half of those people surveyed said that as a country, we are not spending enough on trails and active transportation infrastructure. We need to prioritize, we need to invest more. That was more than any other mode of transportation that was supported. Quite something else.
It's quite something else. And I think that conversation and that question of, is this nice to have or is this need to have? What it's showing us is the infrastructure is everywhere. It's really proliferating in unique ways. But also people are saying this is need to have. And that's a really good transition, William, to my question for you. And just reinforcing that it's not an accident, right, that we are here in Columbus today. And that is because we want the country to look at what's happening in Columbus and understand that this is what the outcome is when places prioritize making it safer, making it more convenient for people to walk and bike over time, right? This just doesn't, we can't wake up tomorrow and say, let's have a trail network. It's
Right.
going to take a little bit of work to get there. It's going to take some time to get there. And what's noteworthy is that we are sitting kind of in the epicenter of an example of a regional trail network, a statewide trail network, and a national trail system that will connect from Washington, D.C. to Washington, D.C., all of which is possible because of that long-term investment. So thinking about your job and your work in Columbus, what do you think sets Columbus apart that makes it such a bastion of trail development?
Well, I appreciate the question, and I appreciate the chance to be here. Rails to Trails has been such great partners in our community. So for those of you who don't know Columbus, Columbus is a quickly growing metropolitan area. So we're on our way to be a region of 3 million people. Wow. And that doesn't fit with a lot of stereotypes of the Midwest. We're growing really quickly. And when we think about how we want to grow, we always frame it through the lens as we want to grow better as we grow bigger. And trails and connectivity is really at the heart of that. So when we think about trails in Central Ohio, when our talented team and all of our volunteers and our local officials look at what do folks want, trails are at the heart of that. We already have a local network of about 200 miles. So you mentioned you look for them and you can find it. But our regions prioritize adding another 500 miles to that network right here. And we are along the Great American Rail Trail and the Ohio to Erie Trail. And that gives us that backbone where we can do things that help economic development, help mobility decisions. But part of that growing better as we're getting bigger is we want to make sure we're serving communities that have been left behind in that network. So equity and prioritizing our investments to make sure that neighborhoods that haven't been connected have that connection is so important to us. Just to give you an idea, with all of these federal funds, it sometimes can get lost because we deal with roads and trains and transit and trails. But just to give you an idea how much momentum there is in just our community, typically in a normal cycle when we do our annual funding process for infrastructure, we've done about $4 million for trails. In our most recent one, we did $60 million.
60?
Yes, and so that is an incredible jump that will allow us to really assertively build on this. And we're so excited about these survey results. We did our own here in the region as part of a sustainability event earlier this fall. And again, the number one thing that people said was more connectivity, more trails, more walkable communities. This was across urban, rural, suburban areas, it was across demographics, and that's so important. And I think maybe the other reason you should be excited to be in Columbus, you can tell that I love our community, is when it comes to encouraging trail use, there's all of these other initiatives that we're working on. So we're working with our regional tourism agency, Experience Columbus, on an online trail pass that encourages people to go out and find trails that they haven't. They get prizes, they can complete challenges, which is a really fun thing to do. We've been partners with Rails to Trails and Green Columbus on a Celebrate Trails Day, and it's one of the largest in the country. And we were really, again, focused on equity, where we brought our partners like Black Girls Do Bike and Remember Us Urban League and and other local organizations together to make sure that we were really looking at how the trails connected. And maybe the last thing I'll add, and there's momentum in other places around the country too, we've been very invested in a trail town program. And specifically along the Ohio Erie Trail and the Great American Rail Trail, where we've been working with college towns, county seats, some villages, on how they can connect their community into the benefits of these trails. More recently, Melinda on our team, who's just brilliant, she had the idea to connect it into urban trail towns. So we're working with a suburban shopping center, historic suburb, and other spots in the city of Columbus, so that all along this trail we can think about different communities and how they can plug into it. So I could go on, but there's so much momentum here. There's money, there's enthusiastic volunteers, and there's a vision to really build out the network.
And I think I want to pick up on a few things you shared, again, for that kind of idea that this is a model for people to understand, right? The vision, the understanding that there's a framework, and we can maximize that both by adding miles, but by engaging community, and by helping people figure out how to tap into it. A lot of times you're talking with folks, oh, we're going to get this connection, we've got this extension. The Great American is a great example where people will say, we're so excited to be a part of it, but we're not sure what happens next. Like, what happens from there? And the idea of helping communities tap into the economic aspect of it from the Trail Town model is just so powerful, because a lot of these communities have not had that kind of amenity. They have not had people coming in from all over the world to experience their town, and there has to be some education and support to make that happen. But the activation piece and the community piece, Mel, that is why we're so excited that you're here today and so excited about the work that Latino Outdoors does. At Rails to Trails Conservancy, we have done quite a bit of research to understand just the barriers to trail participation, right? What keeps people, the infrastructure is there, what keeps you from going out and using it? And infrastructure is an important part of the equation, for sure. People want to know that they have safe access to places where they can walk and bike. They don't necessarily, they're nervous if they think they're gonna get dumped out onto a roadway and they aren't sure kind of what's gonna happen. That's where that network piece comes into play. But they also want to know that this is a space for them. So whether that's fun, just kind of going out and having a good time, or whether that's kind of getting around town or everything in between, they want to know that that's a space for them. So I'm curious, when we think about just the history in our country of these spaces maybe not always being as inclusive as they could be, what is Latino Outdoors doing to get more people outside? And how, when we think about the just proliferation of trail networks, how does that factor into your goals?
Yeah, thank you, Brandy. That's a great question. And for those who might not be familiar, Latino Outdoors is a community-led organization dedicated to engaging Latine populations across the coast, across the country, to engage and recreate in outdoor spaces. And one of the biggest ways in which we do that, we like to center our Latinidad, so cultural threads that really tie us all together, and to create that relevancy, to create that safe space so that people feel comfortable and welcomed and empowered to be with us when they are in those outdoor spaces, and then hopefully eventually empowered and confident on their own. And one of the ways in which we do this is one of our campaigns is called Vamos Outdoors, Let's Go Outdoors. And we offer free events and programming for the public, catering to Latine, multi-generational families, bilingually. And one of the biggest reasons why we do that, and one of our biggest benefits from RTC, particularly in all of these trails that we're experiencing, is an opportunity to see the outdoors in our own way, and an opportunity to feel confident and to feel safe in these green spaces that, as you mentioned, Brandy, have historically either underrepresented or misrepresented BIPOC communities, tragically for a very long time. And so this is an opportunity for us to reclaim that narrative, to shape that outdoor narrative a little bit, but also to, I think you said something really, I think, important, is that, it's not just necessarily if you build it, they will come. That's not the case, especially when you have such a tough history of outdoor access or lack of outdoor access. And so when we have these spaces, it's incredible for us to be able to, one, be a recipient in our own rights and to enjoy these spaces, but also to be able to bring other people and show them that, there's so much that you can do in these spaces. It's not just walking, it's not just hiking. We can bike there. Recently, when Latino Outdoors, in my own chapter, we had a fishing clinic where we brought people out for the first time to learn how to fish. And that was only accessible through a Rails to Trail, space. And what's exciting is that, it's this exposure. It's this, oh wow moment, I didn't even know this was here. Or, oh, I did know this was here, but I didn't know we could do it in this way. And it's those moments, it's those testimonies that, make me personally, come back to work every day and love doing the job that I'm doing. But also it builds a future of advocacy within our community. And, when we collectively can say, I have a connection to this space, I can relate, I feel safe, I know what this does, and I know the benefits it gives to me and my community, how much more likely are each and every one of us to get involved in protecting those spaces? And how much more involved are we in conserving those green spaces and making sure that, not just us, but future generations can enjoy that? And so it's been incredible to have this immediate access. I know for me personally, so many amazing protected trails are just right down the block from me. And just being able to enjoy that and say, this is a safe space and I can come here and we know that this is here and exists. It's a beautiful opportunity to really be able to experience and to share.
That's fantastic, and we're going to talk in a minute here about the urgency of this moment we're in. There's the opportunity, which is clearly, you know, right in front of us to take, but there is some urgency, and I think what you shared about getting out in these spaces, they're welcoming, they're close to home, that's also how behavior starts to change. Oh, yeah. You start to think about, how might I get around town? And I'm not going to flip backwards because I might not get forwards in time, but there's a stat in there about just people saying one of the factors that would make them choose to walk or bike more is more places within a 10 to 20 minute walk of where they live, and then more trails, protected bike lanes, sidewalks to get there. Also in that top 5 was family and friends to do it with. So it just shows that the top 5 things it would take for people to do this, it is infrastructure and other people, community, that engagement piece. And I think we know that, but I think reinforcing that and lifting that up for the country to understand this is what has to happen. So important. We've talked a little bit about the fact that we are on the Great American Rail Trail route today. And for those who don't know what the Great American Rail Trail is, shame on you. It is a 3,700 mile route between Washington, D.C. and Washington State, and it goes right through Columbus. We are, just not too far from it, actually sitting right here. It is significant because it will become an iconic piece of infrastructure for the country, but it is almost more significant because it is bringing really incredible momentum to the places that it connects. There are communities that haven't been able to tap into the advocacy for a long time, who, in Nebraska, we have some great examples where we've been able to unlock trail funding that they've been seeking for 30 years, right? Because of the Great American Rail Trail vision. It was really this tool to kind of build that support, build that momentum. So people are always eager to know, Ryan, at the end of the year, what is the progress? Is it done? That's the number one question. Yeah. Is it done? And the answer is no. But can you tell us what's happening?
It's not done, but it's certainly significant progress has been made, and I get asked that question often. I love getting that question. And so as Brandy mentioned, this is the Great American Rail Trail will be the first multi-use protected trail to span the country, 12 states and Washington, D.C., 3,700 miles. And truly, I think, an iconic, the ultimate example of connected trails in many ways. So this next year will be the 5th anniversary. We launched in May of 2019, and so it's a big year for the trail for us. So just kind of a report out on what has happened. The route is now 55% complete. I think you can see a visual here. And in many ways, from the Midwest to the East is close to getting complete. We think in not many more years, you'll be able to go all the way from Indiana to Washington, D.C. without being around cars. Like, imagine that, just in a few years from now. 55% complete, more than 100 miles completed since it was started, $117 million in investment. So we're really proud of what's happened. I think it is that example of what do you do when you take disparate trails, connect them together. You unleash economic development, you unleash investment, and I think more than anything, you create a vision for anyone being part, something bigger than their own selves.
We talked earlier this year with Governor Inslee from Washington about why things like the Great American Rail Trail matter, and he said exactly that being part of something bigger than what you're doing locally can give you the new energy, can give you the new resources to really get what you're doing locally done in an even better way. So it's just such a powerful idea to be part of this whole vision, and we're so thrilled that Columbus is there, and we're here to celebrate that. And we launched our broadcast for the May 2019 event. One of the big hubs was right here. We were on the Camp Chase Trail, and it was such a special day. So I promised everyone we will not do that level of celebration again this year, but we will have some things up our sleeve, so everyone should stay tuned for that. So I'm going to ask this question of the whole group, and we've started to touch on it a little bit as we've kind of talked about the opportunity and the potential that's kind of before us. What's so significant about this moment we're in my view, is that there is a critical mass now of trail networks. I think, for 30 years, Rails to Trails Conservancy has been paying attention to the opportunity for connectivity. The idea for the Great American Rail Trail is something that we've known since the beginning, right? But you can look at the potential and you can say this is a good idea, but until there's a certain tipping point moment, it's hard for it to become something that can truly catch fire. And we're there. We're at the catch fire moment, I think, in a really big way. But there is, I think, a looming question, and one that we haven't all answered, about how we ensure that the benefits of this infrastructure really are distributed and equitably shared, right? How do we make sure that those investments are being channeled into the communities that might not have access to federal funding on a typical basis? They don't have a grant writer, they don't have, that skill set just to tap into, maybe because they're rural communities, maybe because they're historically disadvantaged communities. There's everything in the middle, right? There's a lot of reasons why that might exist. And just broadly, what does it take for us to create a system that truly serves every neighborhood? And I'm going to start with you, William, not to put you on the spot, but because you started to tap into it, right? You said that's a priority for these next 500 miles. So what does that look like? What can we learn from what you guys are doing?
Yeah, well, I appreciate the question because it's so much at the heart of what we're thinking about. When we look at our trail network, the places that have trails, with nothing meant to denigrate the efforts of the past, but are places where it might have been easier, or certain neighborhoods or certain communities prioritized it and valued it, and others may not have had the resources. And so it became really apparent when we studied the network where those gaps were, which neighborhoods were left behind. We've done prioritization studies, and looking at those gaps, we want to fill the most important ones first and make sure we're connecting people in. So working with the volunteer community, our organization works with cities, towns, counties, but also with nonprofits, environmental groups, neighborhood groups, to find the resources. So we have people on our team who help write grants, who look for these opportunities, who help connect them in. A lot of times too, it's not just knowing where the trail needs to be, it's having all that information. So I'm a planner, I could go on about this, but having maps, having that data from our organization, but also from national organizations like Rails to Trails, is so important so that we can tell the story we need to pull the funding into these neighborhoods.
Yeah. And I want to quickly spin that over to you, Mel, about having the information, having the kind of grand vision of this is a priority. How do we tap into the advocacy, right? Mm-hmm. How do we tap into the people?
Yeah. And it's certainly not something that happens overnight, right? And I think that's why these affinity spaces and affinity organizations like Latino Outdoors exist, because as we mentioned, we discussed earlier, there's been such a long history of underrepresentation and misrepresentation. And, we as an organization and as affinity groups have built relationships with our community very naturally. And then, of course, formally. But William, I think you hit it on the head. It's also about recognizing, yes, we have these relationships, but how far can that go if we don't have the resources to do the advocacy? So being grant recipients on our end, to encourage programming, to encourage awareness, to actually, sit down during Latino Advocacy Week that happens every year to say like, hey, this is a moment where we can collectively come together as a community again, and in service for these green spaces, not just as the beneficiaries and the recipients, which we naturally are, and that's amazing, but to say like, yes, we want to save this for the future and we want to keep it up in the future. And it takes a lot of work. It takes so much. It takes a lot of that resource investment. It takes a lot of that relationship building and connecting. I love that, William, you had mentioned, different affinity organizations that your, community have partnered with, and keeping those voices involved and at the table is incredibly important. And even moments like this where, I am not a president, I'm not an executive director, I'm simply a community advocate. I am a member of my community. And to have a voice, to be able to say like, this is important and we also have stake in the game, and that we need to be more involved as well. So it's many things all together, but being able to say like, yes, we have the resources, we have the relationships, now together let's pull that to do some of the grassroots work that we're known to do. Let's do it. Let's do it in a big way.
Let's do it. And Ryan, nationally, what does that look like? What's happening?
Yeah, well, Mel, you are probably a future executive director, if not now. And I love what you said before in terms of getting outdoors in your own way. And I think that's the real opportunity with connected trails, is people to be able to use them in their own way. For us, it's about people using them every day. That trails are really part of people's everyday lives, not just something you might do occasionally as an enthusiast. And nationally, there is just tremendous opportunity. So I kind of talked at a macro level in terms of the funding and the political will, the public will. What we're trying to do as an organization is to make sure that communities have equal access to that. So something that we started just at the beginning of this year, hard to believe it's just this year, is something called the Trail Nation Collaborative. And we're bringing together many of these trail networks from all across the country to learn from each other, to learn from us, we did something called the Trail Nation Playbook, which is essentially the first manual, how do you create a trail network? We did something right, we did some things wrong, and then ultimately I think we figured out at least some best practices. So we're bringing communities of all different types together to now learn from each other. And we do a lot of technical assistance, a lot of capacity building for groups across the country. You can literally just call us up and ask for ask for advice. But I think for much of that, we're really targeting much of that to historically disadvantaged communities and making sure that they're equipped with all of the kind of best practice for how you win these funding awards, how you really make the most of it.
100%. I'm so glad you said that. And for those who don't know what Trail Nation is, it is kind of a macro initiative of the organization to more quickly help connect the trails across the country, right? So that we can really unlock the power and the potential of this infrastructure. So there's model projects, there's the playbook, and there's the collaborative. So a little bit of building the examples, a little bit of doing the teaching and the education, and helping make those resources available. So final question before we have some closing thoughts. Urgency. We are in just an opportunity moment. That's what we've kind of said, once in a generation, right? The demand, the funding, all of these things. We know that that's probably not going to last forever. That's one kind of piece of the equation. The challenges that we're up against as a country are also challenges that we don't have a whole lot of time to wait. You know, the economic challenges the communities are facing, the mental health crisis that this country is facing, the physical health crisis we've been facing for a very long time, and the climate crisis that the world is facing. It's been really interesting to have this event happening kind of at the tail end of COP28, and just the conversation that's happening about, you know, some countries saying like, we'll just reduce emissions, and other countries saying like, please, just no more fossil fuels at all. And we hold a key to some of that. We really, really do. So I just wanted to throw out the question of, you know, what do you all think, and anyone can jump in first, what do you all think is at stake if we don't realize those 150 trail networks and more, right, that we know are out there and being conceived of, you know, as we speak? You want to jump in?
I can jump in.
Sure.
I think, you know, we talk so much about what a resilient community looks like, especially in the face of significant climate change and disasters. And, you know, when we look at the communities most impacted by these climate disasters and moments, it's frontline BIPOC communities, typically. And so this urgency has always really been prevalent, I think, for a lot of these communities. And I'm glad it's, you know, getting its main stage and point now, but, you know, there is so much that we need to get done on behalf of these communities because we have done so much wrong against them too. So right there's a significant environmental justice piece that we need to address and bring to the forefront. But also the urgency in terms of, you know, you hit it right on the head too. There's physical and mental well-being on the line. And the more that we can bring families outside, you know, from Latino Outdoors' perspective, the more that we can bring families outside, the more that we can put together community and outdoor exposure, reduce cortisol levels, you know, the healthier our community is going to be and the more resilient they're going to be. And this resiliency is important because, again, that theory of change, the next step in that connection, in that relationship, is that advocacy piece. So then my next step is, okay, how do I get you to call a representative to advocate on behalf of these trails? Or how do we create a groundswell movement, right? So that it's not just, you know, from a city, municipal, or state level, bringing these trails to communities, but communities uplifting themselves and saying, hey, we have this space, we have this need, we have this want. How do we get together and do something about it, right? So the urgency is certainly there, and I think prioritizing BIPOC communities in those conversations are going to be key.
100%.
I couldn't agree with you more, Mel. What you said was so powerful, and when we think about the kind of region we want to be, the urgency is to connect into those communities that have been left behind and make sure we're prioritizing that. I also think about the urgency that coming out of the pandemic that we learned, especially with young people. And I think there's urgency with young people for so many things because they're going to inherit this planet, this region. But we could lose their confidence. And what I mean by that is during the pandemic, we all moved heaven and earth to do things we hadn't done before. They saw that it could be done. And here we are when we're thinking about trails and connecting to neighborhoods, and we have the resources. We have the momentum. We have nonprofits, environmental cities, that's the state of Ohio, the federal government. We're all making these resources available. And if we can't do it now, if we make excuses now that it's too hard, especially in our region, we'll lose that confidence. So one of the things that we've done, and it's just a microcosm of what's going on in our region, is every summer the last couple years we've partnered with some local foundations, Easton Foundation, Ohio State Sustainability Institute, their planning school, to place young people in communities to help them address their greenways and trails challenges. Whether it's planning or developing connections to schools or safety around it, or we've even done local foods along some of the rails to trails, showing these communities the brilliance of these young people to find solutions. And now that we have the resources to do it, I think that urgency is, we got to do it. They're counting on this moment to leave this legacy that affects resilience and climate and equity and so many things.
Yeah, I love that. And I certainly would echo, I think, in terms of the kind of, existential challenges that face us now. I mean, it's the challenge of mental health, of physical activity. Trails are right, as you said, they are closer than you think. So having more of those is very powerful. To your question on the environment, so the vehicular cars and vehicles emit more emissions than any other category. And what doesn't? Well, walking and biking, right? So, I mentioned at the beginning some survey data in terms of people who would want to have an alternative. What's really interesting, and this is data that we've known for quite a while, is that just right now, 1/2 of all car trips are within a 20-minute bike ride. 1/4 of all car trips are within a 20-minute walk. So many of the trips we take are short. The real obstacle is safety and convenience. And so that's why trail networks are so valuable. We can have a way not only for people to improve their physical, mental health, they can get out from behind a windshield and do something for the planet as well.
Yeah. What a good closing set of, call to action even, right, of what we need to do. And I think, when you look at the pins on the map, when you look at the 150 places that are currently working to create trail networks, when you know that there are probably 150 more that we just haven't uncovered yet, right, that are either at the early stages, they haven't put it on paper, they haven't made it to that point. I find it to be invigorating that we have a solution here. We have a solution that it really is a low-cost solution to many of these things, right? Sometimes those $60 million sounds like a lot, but when you're building a bridge for a highway, it's a drop in the bucket, right? It's a drop in the bucket. So for me, I'm leaving this feeling just incredibly motivated and energized, right? To get those 150 trail networks done and find all the rest of them and do the same thing. Closing thoughts, and we'll start with you, William. We'll move to Ryan.
Great. So again, thanks for bringing this conversation together. Partnerships. So to anybody who's watching or involved, we're a metropolitan planning organization, a regional council. There's one in every major metropolitan area in the country. They're working on the nuts and bolts of how to set the network up for this, whether it's complete streets policies or funding, or while it seems dry, that gives that underlying support for all of what we're doing at the regional level. But it won't be successful without partnerships. So if you're in local government or state government, you got to be talking to the nonprofit community. You got to be looking at who's involved and see who's missing. And if you're in the nonprofit world or a neighborhood group, you have to look at these organizations that are in this space, like a metropolitan planning organization, partner with them, and if not, challenge them to do more. And that's that challenge the community, like Mel had said, lifting their voice up to say, this is what we need. Help us to connect our community. That's really powerful. So partnerships and not being afraid to push for better.
I love it. Yeah, and I think it's almost a +1 to what you just said,
yes,
William. I
yes.
think, for me, it's always about making sure that people can come to the table, they have a seat at the table, but that they don't lose their voice when they're there. And that when they do have their voice, that they're also heard, listened, respected, and considered in those spaces too. Because, bringing me to the table to share, whatever my testimonial is, or, the community from which I come from, whatever that might be, that's beautiful. I love it. Believe me, I do. But if no action stems from it, we lose confidence. We lose that relationship. We lose that urgency, right? So just making sure that, as we continue to build partnerships and relationships and grant programs and resources, that we move beyond the performative action of just having people to share their opinions and really talk about what are the tangible next steps that we can do in order to build community, build awareness for these spaces, and get people out there and using them in the ways that they want and need to be used.
I love that.
Yeah, +2 or I second or third that emotion, whatever is the right way to put it. We talked a lot throughout this about kind of the change in attitudes and behaviors that we've seen. And Brandon and I, we talk about this often, but that, what happened during the pandemic was a different type of social movement. That usually social movements, there's some change in attitudes that happens over some long period of time, and then there's a change in behaviors, which also takes a long period of time, right? And so on. What we saw in the pandemic was almost an overnight change in attitudes and behaviors simultaneously, like a realization that safe outdoor activity is more than just nice to have, and an actual doing of it, the actual enjoyment of it. That's hugely powerful. But when we talk about urgency, I think we all feel gratitude that attitude and behavior are sustained, but it's not inevitable. And it's certainly up to us to continue to do what we've done to really push the urgency, the value of what we're doing. The more connected trails we have, the more people will be out there enjoying them, the more that they will become advocates. And that's really how we do it. We get more people in this movement by having them live the actual activity and understand its value. So it's a huge moment, but it's not one we take for granted. We have to work to continue it.
That's right. And with that, we will wrap it up, but I will encourage everyone to go to railstotrails.org/trailnation. The map that is, we saw the picture today, it's interactive. So you can click through, you can see all the trail networks, you can learn about those trail networks. You can also learn more about the various initiatives, the Trail Nation Collaborative, the Playbook, and the lots of ways that we're working to activate and build these spaces. So thank you so much. This is wonderful.